At my mom's 60th birthday party, my sister raised her glass, smiled, and called me a beggar in front of everyone. 30 days later, she was wiring rent money straight into my account. I swear, the second those words left her mouth, the air in that living room shifted. It was like someone had cracked open a champagne bottle, but instead of bubbles, venom sprayed out. People froze mid-bite, forks clinked against plates, and there she was, Vanessa holding her overpriced crystal flute like she was the Queen of Austin, Texas, and I was just her court jester. The music didn't even stop. That was the worst part. Some cheap Bluetooth speaker kept pumping out 80-second hits while I stood there, cheeks burning, smile plastered on like a bad Instagram filter. My mom laughed, thinking it was all in good fun. My uncle, half drunk on whiskey, let out this wheezing cackle. Even my little cousin smirked, probably because she'd learned early from the adults that mocking Rachel was a family pastime. It was the kind of moment you replay later in the shower, inventing comebacks you didn't think of in time. Except this wasn't a one-off insult. This was a public declaration of a role they'd assigned me years ago, the struggling one, the one who never quite made it. I raised my glass back to her, because what else could I do? You don't throw a fit in front of 30 people you only see twice a year. Not in this family. You smile, you let it slide. You let them believe you're too polite, too soft to bite back. Vanessa looked gorgeous, of course. She always does. Perfect blowout, the kind of makeup that looks like it cost a week's paycheck, wrapped in a silk dress that probably did. And that house, oh, she loves to remind everyone about that house. A 2-story colonial on a corner lot, white trim, wrap-around porch, the kind you see on real estate postcards. She bought it all on her own, according to her, which is hilarious because everyone in the room knows Mom co-signed the loan and Dad gifted her the down payment after selling Grandpa's fishing cabin. I was standing in the kitchen doorway when she said it. The smell of vanilla buttercream was thick in the air. Mom had just carried out this huge birthday cake with gold candles shaped like a 6 and a 0. Vanessa was at her side, playing the role of the devoted eldest daughter, ready to give a toast. She clinked her glass with her manicured nail. Ding, ding, ding. To Mom, she said, smiling like a toothpaste commercial. And to family, especially those of us who've never had to beg for a roof over our heads. And then her eyes locked on mine. She didn't even blink. The laughter that followed was instant and loud. It wasn't just her friends. Even some of my own relatives chuckled, probably without thinking, because in this family, Vanessa sets the tone. I felt my stomach drop, but my face didn't move. Years of practice, I sipped my wine and said cheers, like the word didn't taste like blood in my mouth. She turned back to Mom, hugged her, and the moment was over for them. Not for me. For me, it was like someone had slid a needle full of cold adrenaline straight into my veins. I should tell you, I'm not the fragile little sister people think I am. Sure, I live in Seattle, in a 1-bedroom apartment I rent month to month. I don't have a husband or kids or a big white house to brag about, but I also don't have a mortgage I can barely afford, a marriage that's cracking under the weight of unpaid credit cards, or a face I can't recognize without contouring. I left Austin at 18 because I knew staying would mean living in Vanessa's shadow forever. She was the golden child varsity cheerleader, homecoming queen, married at 23 to a guy with a family construction business. I was the artsy one, the free spirit, which in my family's language means probably going to fail. The truth? I made peace with their opinion years ago. But that night, watching her smirk over the rim of that crystal glass, something shifted. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was disrespect. And in that disrespect, there was an opportunity. I noticed something that night. Something small. Something she didn't realize she'd left out in plain sight. On the coffee table, next to the cheese board, was a thick envelope, one of those legal-sized manila ones, half hidden under a stack of glossy home design magazines. And peeking out from the flap was a corner of a document I'd seen before. A property tax statement. I don't know why it caught my eye. Maybe because I'd worked part-time for a property law firm back in Seattle. Maybe because the name printed on the visible corner wasn't hers. But in that split second, I knew this humiliation wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. I let the rest of the night pass in a blur. I helped Mom cut cake, hugged relatives goodbye, and thanked Vanessa for hosting, like the perfect little sister she'd just called a beggar. But inside, I was cataloging every detail, the way she kept boasting about renovations, the way her husband avoided talking about money, the way Mom seemed tense. That house was her throne, her identity, her weapon, and I had just seen the first crack in its foundation. By the time I left the party, the Texas night air was heavy with humidity, and my dress clung to my back. I got into my rental car, shut the door, and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding like I'd run a mile. 30 days later, she'd be paying me rent. But right then, all I knew was this. You don't get to call me a beggar in my own family without paying for it one way or another. And the best part? She'd never see it coming. The thing about flying back to Texas is it always feels like stepping into a version of myself I've tried hard to outgrow. My Seattle self is composed, independent, a woman with her own life and her own apartment, even if it's just a modest one-bedroom above a coffee shop. My Texas self? She's the little sister, the one everyone still talks about in the past tense, like I'm stuck at 17. I booked the flight because it was Mom's 60th, and no matter how complicated our family dynamics get, I wasn't going to miss it. That's not who I am. I even splurged on a decent gift, an antique pearl brooch I found in a Pike Place market shop, tucked in a velvet box. It felt classy, timeless, something she'd actually wear. When I landed at Austin Bergstrom, the heat hit me like a thick quilt, the kind that smothers you instead of keeping you warm. I rented a mid-sized sedan and drove the familiar route out to Vanessa's neighborhood. The streets were lined with live oaks and neatly trimmed lawns, the kind of place where every mailbox matches and the homeowners association sends nasty letters if your garbage cans are visible. Vanessa's house sat right on the corner, big and white with black shutters, a wraparound porch dotted with ferns in hanging baskets. It was the kind of home that photographs well for Christmas cards. The kind she posted online constantly number blessed, number home sweet home, number grateful. She answered the door in a champagne-colored wrap dress, her hair in those perfect barrel curls that look effortless but take an hour to achieve. She kissed my cheek like we were old friends, not sisters, with a decade of tension between us. "Rachel, you made it," she sang, voice all honey and hospitality. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon candles and money. Everything gleamed, polished hardwood floors, a grand staircase, a dining room set that looked like it belonged in a catalog. And everywhere, little curated displays stacked coffee table books, artfully arranged bowls of lemons, silver picture frames with photos of her husband, and their two blonde kids looking like they'd stepped out of an ad for orthodontics. "Your flight okay?" she asked, leading me into the living room where a crowd was already forming. "Smooth enough," I said, handing her the wrapped box. "Happy birthday to Mom." She took the gift, smiled politely, then set it on a side table without even a peek. "Oh, you didn't have to get anything. You have that tiny apartment and all." I felt it a little sting. The first one of the evening. People milled around, sipping wine, balancing plates of hors d'oeuvres. I caught snippets of conversation, someone bragging about a real estate deal, someone else discussing their kids' college acceptances. A few relatives came over to hug me, but their eyes darted around like they were afraid to get stuck talking too long. Mom looked radiant, wearing a deep green dress and her hair pinned up, laughing at something one of Vanessa's friends said. She gave me a quick hug, told me she was so glad I came, and floated off again. The hat Zongbatung started sprouting fast. Vanessa guided a group on a tour of the house. Yes, a literal tour, like she was selling it. She pointed out the crown molding, the reclaimed barnwood kitchen island, the original stained glass window in the stairwell. "This old beauty is all mine now," she declared at least twice. "Took a lot of hard work, but worth it." I didn't correct her. I didn't say, "hard work" looked a lot like Mom's signature on your mortgage application and Dad liquidating Grandpa's cabin to fund your down payment. I just smiled, because I've learned that in this family, facts are optional, but appearances are mandatory. We ended up in the backyard, where twinkle lights draped across the fence and a rented outdoor heater kept the December air just warm enough. A server in black carried trays of champagne flutes, and Vanessa snatched one, holding it like a prop in a lifestyle magazine shoot. "You must miss having space like this," she said to me, eyes glittering. "A yard, a porch, a home you actually own." It was so casual, so perfectly delivered that anyone listening would think it was just sisterly teasing. But I knew better. This was her game. Every conversation an opportunity to remind me of the scoreboard she thought we were playing on. I leaned on the railing, scanning the crowd. That's when I noticed it, a manila envelope on the patio table, half hidden under a stack of Southern Living magazines. The flap wasn't sealed, and a corner of a document peeked out. Property tax statement. The name on it wasn't Vanessa's Pratian. Weird. But I filed it away. The night went on with more of the same. Vanessa introducing me to her friends as my baby sister who's doing the Seattle thing, like my life was a phase I'd grow out of. Her friends asking if I was ever coming back home, as if Seattle were some backpacking trip gone on too long. Underneath it all, though, I could feel this low hum of tension. Mom's smiles seemed tighter than usual. Vanessa's husband avoided eye contact when people brought up money. And that envelope, it nagged at me like a splinter. I stayed polite, kept my laugh light, but every time Vanessa made another comment about finally having everything she'd worked for, my eyes flicked back to that table, that envelope, that crack in her perfect picture. By the time we moved inside for cake, I'd already decided I was going to find out exactly what was in there. And once I did, there'd be no going back. I'm the second born, which, in our family, is basically a supporting role in the Vanessa show. Growing up in Austin, everything seemed to revolve around my older sister. Vanessa was the first grandchild, the first to walk, the first to bring home straight A's. She got the biggest bedroom in the house, the one with 2 windows and a walk-in closet, because she's older and needs more space. I got the smaller room with the creaky floorboards and a window that stuck in summer. Don't get me wrong, our parents weren't cruel. They fed us, kept us clothed, made sure we went to decent schools. But when it came to attention, investment, and belief in potential, the scales tipped hard toward Vanessa. She was the one Mom drove to cheer practice and stayed to watch. She was the one Dad coached through business competitions in high school. By the time I was old enough to need rides, they were too busy with Vanessa's next big thing. I took the bus. I figured things out on my own. That became my default. Self-sufficiency. When I turned 18, I left. Packed up my beat-up Toyota Corolla and drove to Seattle with $1,200 in my checking account, a secondhand futon, and a place in the freshman dorms at a state college. I paid my own tuition, worked in a bookstore, ate a lot of ramen. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Vanessa stayed in Austin. She went to a local university, commuted from home, no rent, meals cooked, laundry done. After graduation, she landed a job at a marketing firm where Dad knew someone. She met Mark, whose family owned a mid-sized construction company. They got married in a vineyard wedding that Mom still calls magical. And then came the house. That white colonial with the wraparound porch wasn't bought with just Vanessa's salary. Mom co-signed the mortgage. Dad sold Grandpa's fishing cabin, a place I loved, by the way, to help Vanessa get her start. The sale was framed as for the good of the family, but really, it was for Vanessa's future. I didn't get a fishing cabin. I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye to it before it was sold. Whenever I came home for holidays, the unspoken comparison was always there. Vanessa, the homeowner, the hostess, the success story. Me, the renter, the one with potential, said in the same tone you'd use for a kid who still might grow out of being a disappointment. And Vanessa, she knew exactly how to play her role. She'd ask about my job in that tilted head way that sounds like interest, but feels like pity. Still working at that little design firm? She'd say, like little was a synonym for irrelevant. And then there was the borrowing. God, the borrowing. The first time, she called in a panic because her car needed new tires and she couldn't ask Mom and Dad again. I wired her $600. She promised to pay me back in a month. She never did. Then it was a short-term loan for a trip she and Mark wanted to take before the kids came $1,500. That one came with a story about how it's just easier if you book it on your card, we'll pay you right after. They didn't. She once borrowed my leather jacket when I came home for Thanksgiving. Said she needed it for a party. When I asked about it months later, she said she'd left it at a bar and shrugged like it was no big deal. The thing about Vanessa is she never apologizes. She just moves on. And the family moves with her. If I brought up the money, I was making a big deal out of nothing. If I mentioned the jacket, I was too attached to material things. Over time, I learned to swallow it, keep the peace, limit contact. My visits to Austin got shorter and further apart. Mom would ask when I was coming home, and I'd say, I am home, meaning Seattle. She'd laugh like I was telling a joke. But no matter how far I went, that dynamic had a way of following me. At work, I became the dependable one, the one who picked up slack, stayed late, kept things running. At friends' weddings, I was the one they seated next to someone's awkward cousin because you're so easy to talk to. It was the same role, just in different settings. The background player who keeps everything together without taking up too much space. So when I tell you that Vanessa calling me a beggar in front of the entire family hit a nerve, understand it wasn't about that one sentence. It was about every holiday, every backhanded comment, every time she took and smiled like she was doing me a favor. It was about being told in subtle and not so subtle ways that my worth was conditional. That night at Mom's birthday party, I watched Vanessa bask in the glow of her guests, telling the story of how she built this home from the ground up. I watched her kids run through the halls laughing, the way I used to at Grandpa's cabin before it was sold out from under me. I watched her husband nod along as she bragged about the new kitchen remodel. And I thought, maybe it's time to change the script. Maybe it's time to stop being the reliable supporting character and start being the one who writes the ending. Because here's the thing about being the second born, the overlooked one, the one they underestimate. People don't watch you as closely, they don't see you coming. And Vanessa? She had no idea I'd been watching her for years. The moment her glass clinked against the light, I knew she was winding up for something. Vanessa has a way of holding a room chin lifted, eyes scanning the crowd like she's about to deliver wisdom, when really, she's loading a bullet. She raised her champagne, the gold bubbles catching the glow of the string lights overhead. To family, she said, pausing just long enough to make everyone lean in. And to the ones who never needed to beg to have a roof over their head. It landed like a slap. There was a beat of silence. Then laughter rippled through the crowd. Not everyone laughed. Some of the older relatives exchanged those polite, strained smiles, but enough people did that it felt like the punchline had been rehearsed. I caught my cousin Emily's eyes across the table. Hers darted away quickly, the kind of look you give someone when you're embarrassed for them but can't afford to be caught showing it. I didn't move, didn't even blink. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass until I could feel the delicate crystal flecks under the pressure. Cheers, Vanessa added, flashing that too white smile. She took a long sip, savoring it. I matched her sip for sip. Inside, I could feel the heat rising, not the kind you can diffuse with a polite laugh, but the kind that burns slow and steady, lighting up every memory of every time she's taken a swing at me and gotten away with it. This was no harmless dig. This was Vanessa staking her claim, right there in her backyard, in front of Mom, her friends, our extended family. It was her saying, "I'm the one on top here." She's still the girl who left and never made it big enough to matter. Except, she just handed me the spark I didn't know I was waiting for. Because as her words echoed in my head, another memory surfaced. It was 6 years ago, at a cramped law office downtown. I'd been there for something entirely unrelated, a freelance design contract that needed a witness signature, but I remember the lawyer, an older man named Frank, making small talk about Austin real estate. Somehow Grandpa's name came up. "Funny thing," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I drew up the will for your grandfather back in the day. Left that big property on Juniper Street to the first grandchild carrying the Bennett name." At the time, I'd shrugged it off. Vanessa was living there, and I assumed everything had been squared away. But Frank had gone on. Far as I know, that deed never got transferred properly after he passed. Could be a paperwork mess waiting to happen. I never thought much about it until now. Juniper Street, the white colonial, this house. And then another detail clicked into place. The manila envelope on the patio table earlier, the property tax statement with a name that wasn't Vanessa's peeking out. It wasn't hers. It was still under Grandpa's estate. I felt my pulse in my ears. I set my glass down carefully, like any sudden movement might tip off the whole party to the storm brewing in my head. Vanessa was still working the crowd, telling some story about how the new kitchen island was imported maple, how she'd fought tooth and nail for the house during the bidding war. Mom laughed at all the right places, but I noticed her hands twisting the napkin in her lap. I excused myself and slipped inside, heart pounding. In the quiet of the dining room, I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. I could be wrong. Maybe the envelope was something else. Maybe Frank's memory was faulty. But deep down, I knew. This house, the crown jewel of Vanessa's self-image, wasn't even legally hers. And if that clause in Grandpa's will still stood, it was mine. I stood there, staring at the family photos on the wall. Vanessa's wedding day, Vanessa holding her firstborn, Vanessa and Mom in front of the house with a sold sign. All these moments, curated to tell a story of triumph and permanence. But the foundation was paper. Paper that I could claim. It wasn't about revenge, at least. That's what I told myself. It was about balance. About not letting her rewrite history in her favor one more time while I stood there smiling through it. The noise from the backyard swelled as someone called for dessert. I walked back out, slipping into my seat as if nothing had happened. Vanessa caught my eye, raised her brows like she was daring me to react. I smiled. Not the polite, self-protective smile she was used to. This one had teeth. Because in that moment I decided I was done letting her set the rules. If she wanted to make me the beggar in this story, fine. She'd just given me the perfect chance to flip the script. And by the time I was done, she wouldn't just regret that toast, she'd be paying rent for the privilege of staying in her own castle. She had no idea the clock had started ticking. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room of a friend's condo downtown. Couldn't bring myself to sleep under Vanessa's roof after that toast. The sunlight was already cutting through the blinds, warm and merciless. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Thanks for coming last night. Hope you had fun." Fun. Right. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. My mind kept looping the same two images. Vanessa's smirk over the rim of her champagne glass, and that manila envelope with the wrong name on it. I didn't need coffee. I needed answers. By 9 a.m., I was standing outside the same law office I'd visited years ago, the one with the fading green awning and brass door handle that never quite turned smoothly. Inside, the air smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. "Rachel Bennett," I told the receptionist, "here to see Frank Larkin. He's expecting me." Frank emerged from his office a few minutes later, looking exactly the same. Silver hair, wire, rimmed glasses, suit a shade too big for his thin frame. "Well, I'll be," he said, shaking my hand. "Haven't seen you in years. What brings you in?" I didn't waste time. "It's about my grandfather's will. You told me once there was a clause about the Juniper Street property. I need to see it." He raised an eyebrow. "Funny you should ask. That file's still in our archives. Give me a sec." While he disappeared into the back, I sat at the long conference table, fingers drumming against the wood. Every nerve in my body felt electric. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore, it was about leverage. Frank returned with a thick manila folder. He slid it across to me, open. There it was, in black and white. "I leave the property located at 427 Juniper Street, Austin, Texas, to my first grandchild carrying the Bennett surname at the time of my death." "That's me," I said slowly. "Unless you've changed your name," Frank said, adjusting his glasses. "Which I don't believe you have. Number. But Vanessa, she's married. Took her husband's name." "Then it's yours. Technically, it always has been." I leaned back in my chair, the reality settling over me. My whole life, I'd been treated like the outsider, the one without a claim to anything. And yet, on paper, I was the legal owner of the crown jewel in Vanessa's life. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. Frank shrugged. "Sometimes families choose not to highlight certain details. And unless you asserted your rights, the status quo stood. Looks like Vanessa's been living there without ever transferring the deed." A slow, deliberate calm washed over me. "What would it take to make that transfer official?" "Not much. Some paperwork, a filing fee, and a notice to the current occupant. If you want, I can get it started today." I smiled for the first time that morning. Do it, quietly. The next week became a blur of signatures and notarizations. I kept everything to myself. Not a word to Mom. Not a whisper to Vanessa. I worked with Frank to pull the tax records, confirm the title, and file the transfer. Every time I thought about telling someone, I pictured Vanessa's face at that party, the way she looked at me like I was some charity case lucky to be invited into her home. And I decided she didn't deserve a warning. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes on Instagram or drop hints in family group texts. I stayed quiet, like a hunter tracking prey, waiting for the exact right moment. By the second week, the county clerk's office had processed the transfer. My name, Rachel Bennett, now appeared as the sole legal owner of 427 Juniper Street. I stared at the document when it arrived in the mail, the embossed seal catching the light. It didn't feel real at first. But then I remembered every time Vanessa had borrowed from me without paying back. Every holiday where she'd found a way to make me small. This wasn't theft. This was taking back what was mine. Frank called the next day. "You're all set. Only thing left is to notify her. Legally, you have to. But how you do that, that's up to you." A dozen scenarios flashed through my mind, mailing the notice with a bow on it, showing up at her door with a bottle of wine and the paperwork. But none of them felt right. No, I wanted the reveal to be clean, controlled, unforgettable. So I decided to have Frank send the letter by certified mail, signature required. No explanation, just the legal notice and my name in the owner line. And then, I waited. The thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it's not loud. It's not throwing a drink in someone's face or screaming across a dinner table. It's patience. It's letting the other person live in ignorance right up until the moment the ground shifts beneath them. Vanessa had no idea that every time she pulled into her driveway, every time she stood on that porch she loved so much, she was standing on my property. Soon she'd find out. And when she did, the girl she'd called a beggar in front of the whole family wouldn't just own the roof over her head. She'd own the floor under her feet. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. She signed for it. I didn't need to ask who she was. I could practically hear Vanessa's scream echoing down Juniper Street. It took less than 2 hours before my phone lit up with her name. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, and another. By the fourth one, I answered. "What the hell is this?" Her voice was sharp, almost shrill. "Some kind of sick joke?" "I'm guessing you got the letter," I said evenly. "You're a snake, Rachel. A backstabbing, pathetic snake. This is my house." "No," I said, calm as if we were discussing the weather. "It's my house. It always has been. Grandpa left it to the first grandchild with the Bennett name. That's me, remember? You changed yours." There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine her face flushing red, her jaw tightening. "You think you can just take what's mine?" "I'm not taking anything," I replied. "You can stay. But you'll pay rent, market price, due on the 1st. She laughed short, bitter. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious." From the other end, I heard muffled voices mark, "Maybe," trying to calm her down. But Vanessa wasn't the calming type when she felt cornered. "You won't get away with this," she snapped. "I'll fight it. You can try, but the deed's in my name. The taxes are in my name. The law's on my side, Vanessa." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded, like the pause before a gunshot. When she hung up, I knew this was far from over. 2 days later, I got the first ripple of family reaction. Mom called, voice trembling. "Rachel, what is going on?" "Vanessa says you're trying to evict her." "I'm not evicting her, Mom," I said. "I'm making her pay rent for living in my house. She's your sister. Family doesn't do this to each other." I almost laughed. "Funny. I thought family didn't humiliate each other at birthday parties, or take loans they never pay back, or borrow things they never return." "That's different," Mom said quickly, but I could hear the uncertainty in her tone. "It's not different, it's the same. I'm just finally playing by the rules everyone else seems to use." She sighed, and for a moment I could tell she was torn, but she didn't push further. I just don't want this to tear us apart." I didn't have the heart to tell her we'd been apart for years. The standoff stretched for a week. Vanessa tried guilt texts about destroying the family, calls to relatives painting me as greedy. She tried intimidation, threatening to get a lawyer, even though hers would tell her the same thing Frank had told me. And then, finally, she tried negotiation. She showed up at my apartment in Seattle unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there in a designer coat, makeup flawless, eyes cold. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room like she owned the place. "Funny," I said, shutting the door. "I was going to say the same to you." She sat down, crossed her legs, and stared me down. "Here's my offer. You transfer the deed back to me, and I'll compensate you, generously." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Not interested." Her jaw clenched. "You don't understand what this is doing to me, to my kids. This house is our life." "I understand perfectly," I said. "It's why I'm giving you the option to stay. Pay rent, Vanessa. That's all I'm asking. Market rate. You can afford it." Her eyes flashed. "I will never pay you to live in my own home." "Then I guess you'll be finding a new one." We stared at each other for a long moment. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw her break. Not cry. Vanessa doesn't cry in front of people, but falter. Her confidence cracked, just enough for me to see the fear underneath. 2 weeks later, the lease agreement arrived at Frank's office with Vanessa's signature on it. When I got my copy, I ran my fingers over the bold black letters. Tenant, Vanessa Whitmore. Landlord, Rachel Bennett. The first rent payment hit my account the following Monday. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, staring at the number, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Because as much as I'd won, it was also proof of how far gone we were as a family. News spread fast. Some relatives sided with Vanessa, whispering about how cold I'd become. Others, quietly, told me they were proud of me for standing up for myself. Mom stayed in the middle, trying to pretend nothing had changed, even as every holiday invite became tense and awkward. But me? I slept better than I had in years. Because every first of the month, Vanessa, my perfect, untouchable sister, wired money straight into my account. And there was no toast in the world that could erase that fact.